We've been talking about expanding this model. We've been talking about providing care to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of people who need cardiac care in a poor country like India. What about the money? Where does the money come from? We haven't talked about money. It's an inconvenient detail. Well, the answer is, to some extent, we didn't need to talk about money in building the core model out. One of the beauties of this model is that the sheer efficiency has been so high that the amount that, even with a very low price point, in other words, a very low dollar amount that Devi and his team are charging the patients, including doing it for free for a goodly percentage of them, they are still able to save, on average, enough from each surgery to build up the cash balances in the hospital. Those cash balances, of course, are used to subsidize the very indigent, but they're also used to reinvest in the corporation, to reinvest in the entire health city and the heart hospital and so on. And that's been really the engine through which, just speaking simplistically, a floor has been added to the heart hospital every year for a number of years, with state-of-the-art equipment, I might remind you. However, when you think about the big problem, the big picture, this is not even a drop of water in the proverbial ocean of problems, right? Just cardiac care is such a deeply endemic problem that for all the greatness and beauty of this effort and the sheer chutzpah and ambition of the effort, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't move the needle. So the question is, if we wanted to step up the rate of expansion tenfold, hundredfold, if you want to be really ambitious, how would you do it? Then you would really need to have money from somewhere else. I always ask my students this because it raises some of the most contentious, difficult issues to deal with, philosophically difficult issues. And my experience is that people are all over the map on where they come out on this. So my agenda here is not to preach a particular approach to you, but to spell out the different philosophical positions on it. I know where I stand, and I encourage you to think about where you might stand, because it's an important question to grapple with. The issue is actually quite simple, stated abstractly. It is, would you be comfortable raising money from financiers? Think about Wall Street, often characterized as being rapacious and greedy, and so on and so forth. Would you be comfortable taking money from Wall Street if that allowed you to scale this incomparably faster and make care available to the poorest of the poor? Or is there something that rubs you the wrong way about taking money from Wall Street, from business, to do good? Stated differently, are you uncomfortable making money off the backs of the poor? Which is another way that people who don't like this sort of investment model would characterize it. Alternatively, if you're not comfortable with that, the alternative, as I see it, are twofold. One, raise money from charity. As a practical matter, I would tend to dismiss that pretty quickly, because as good as it sounds, charity is not scalable. It turns out to be extremely difficult to find enough charitable money to reinvest in a corporation like this at scale. If you're lucky, you might find somebody with a very fat endowment that he or she wants to leave to something like this, but I would submit that waiting for that to happen is not very smart. So if you discount charity, as I do, the only other option you're left with is to run what I call a demonstration effect experiment. In other words, it remains at this small scale. It affects a lot of people, but not nearly enough to make a dent in the healthcare fabric of the country, let alone the world. But it is a beacon of light. It is a demonstration effect. It's pure, it's untainted, as some would have you believe, by money from financiers who may be rapacious and greedy and what have you. By the way, I don't subscribe to those characterizations, but there's a goodly number of people who might characterize it that way. And the cost of not taking money from that institutional structure is that you remain a boutique and a small experiment. And then you sit back and hope that others will replicate this in the fullness of time and the goodness of their hearts. And that's how this is going to scale. So given those options, and there's a spectrum that I just painted, taking money from financiers and scaling up fast, to not taking any money from financiers at the cost of remaining a boutique, exciting, but ultimately insignificant experiment, where do you end up on that spectrum? Think about it. As it turned out, Devi and his team did raise money from institutional investors, people like JP Morgan, AIG, a fairly sizable sum of money, and the money is supposed to be used to expand the operations of the cardiac heart hospital, but also the health city, both expand across India and to take it overseas. Time will tell whether this is the most sensible way to expand, and watch the space.